Hi Booktube, and welcome to a new video which is going to be a weekly wrap up with a bit of bonus unboxing at the end. I'm recording this before I disappear off to my publisher's Christmas party later today, so hopefully I'll get the chance to upload it before I dash off. I'm talking about 4 books, and the first of these is Gabriel Josipovici, The Cemetery in Barnes. Now, I'd read a non-fiction book by Josipovici called Whatever Happened to Modernism, which was hugely disappointing because it miserably failed to answer that question. But this is my first fiction by him, and I think this has made the Goldsmiths Prize shortlist, which was recently announced. The winner was... oh, this is great. I can't remember who the winner was. I'll put it in the show notes. And I found this very engaging. There's 2 aspects to it. One is a sort of a mystery element as to what exactly happened, in that there are sort of 2 or 3 different versions of things going on from the same narrator. So you might feel that it's evidence of an unreliable narrator, but I don't think it is. I think it's more about the slippage in character, both in fiction but also in real life. How well can you ever know a person? How consistent are we? And I think it's more to do with slippage than sort of conscious misleading of the reader through an unreliable narrator. And I'll come back to a bit about what those mystery elements are. But what I really liked about the book was its sort of formalism, its repetition. Because you've got these these inconsistent reportage of the same thing, you're not sure which one of them sort of holds out. But there are certain key anchoring phrases that keep cropping up, absolutely word for word. So, for example, the man has married a second wife, and she's always saying that she feels inferior to him, that she's not as well read as him, and he keeps saying this phrase, yes, but she has other qualities, or yes, but you have other qualities. And it becomes sort of quite mantra-like. It sort of immediately returns you to rooting in this couple. And the second one, the book takes place in 3 places. With his first wife, it's in southwest London. Then she dies in ways which we'll come back to. So he sort of flees off to Paris to sort of rebuild himself in sort of complete isolation and solitariness, where he sort of gets by on translation work and walking the city. Really rigorous habitual lifestyle that he uses to centre himself. And then the third one's with this second wife in Wales, in the countryside. So, and it will pass from one setting and one time scale, within the space of a paragraph. But it's very easy to follow. So when he talks about his second wife, when he's writing about something with his second wife in the Welsh farmhouse, you know that's what he's talking about. You know that's the location. You know that's the time scale. But he will also say, when the first thing that she says in that scene, who was his second wife, in the same way as earlier he sort of, yes, but she has other qualities. Now this is constant throughout the book. Every time the scene moves to Wales and she says something, Josipovici writes, who was his second wife. We know that. We can tell that from the context. But there's something rather... it had a strange effect on me. I really welcome that sort of formal discipline, because you've got all these other things which are uncertain, not fixed, but there are these few sort of touchstones that are absolutely fixed, absolutely root you. And I really appreciated that formalism. I thought it was very clever. As to the mystery elements, well, there's 2 mystery elements, both around his wives. So the first wife has died, as we know. What is not clear is how she's died. There seem to be 2 or 3 different versions of that. One is, what is undeniable is that she falls into the Thames, the River Thames. What is not clear is whether she dies from drowning, or whether she dies from pneumonia or some bacteria that she's picked up in the Thames. There's a hint that he actually pushed her in. And then with the second wife, it seems to end, again, it's not entirely clear whether she dies, but it's implied, in a fire in their farmhouse. But there's also talk of another farmhouse or a barn in the same area that burns down. So is it theirs or is it another one? And these are the sort of slippages. These are the sort of... You're not quite sure you know, which of these is truth, is fact. And, you know, that was all well and good. But I was, as I say, I was really engaged with the language and the formalism, the sound of it inside my head. That's what I really appreciated more than, because I don't think you can resolve which of those truths are the actual one that happened. And the other section of him in Paris, you know, he's sort of lying down under a tree on the Seine, you know, in the shade, and a woman comes and this sort of lies down with him, and it seems to be something sexual. Is that the woman who then went on to become his second wife, or is it somebody else? Again, that's not specified. But a lot of the Paris stuff. So he's a translator, but he's not interested in anything that he translates, because it's just working, you know, stiff kind of jobs that he gets. He doesn't read he's not interested in the books that he's asked to translate. But his pet side project is translating French poetry, and there's a lot about the difficulty of translating poetry. Not only retaining the sort of the rhyme and the metre, but just one particular poet, whose name I can't now remember, wrote in a strange sort of mixture of literary and sort of quite sort of stiff, formal, sort of French language style. And he, you know, there's a lot about that. Again, the way I've just said that makes it terribly dull and uninteresting, but actually, it was engaging. So, I don't know, I gave this 4 stars. I enjoyed it. I'm not sure what I got beyond the book other than the pleasure of reading it. I don't think I got any ideas or any insights. You don't always have to get that from books. It was just a pleasure to read. And on to John Berger and Our Faces, My Heart, Brief as Photos. So I saw Sean the Book Maniac talking about this, and I've read The Art of Seeing by John Berger, which is non-fiction. Sean made this sound quite interesting, because it's not clear whether, how you peg this. Is it fiction? Is it non-fiction? It's certainly a mixture of things. It contains poetry that he's written, art criticism, sort of scenery description, stroke travel writing, musing on time, space, death, separation, migration, which is very timely, what he writes about migration in here. And it's basically some sort of meditation for separation from a partner. So he's in a foreign country, she's somewhere else. So there's a scene about him sort of musing on sending letters to her via the post office. There's lots of poetry to her. There's a whole meditation on separation. Then there's a scene at a train station where she's obviously come to visit him. The book is divided into 2. The first is on time, the second is on space, but they're only really loose headings. And I wasn't too much into the poetry, but the rest of it, including the art criticism, which is what he's as well known as an art critic as he is a novelist, because he did win the Man Booker one year, and interestingly used his speech to round on the sponsors of the prize for their sort of historical involvement in the slave trade during the British Empire, the early days of the British Empire, and dedicated that he was going to use all his prize money and donate it to the Black Panthers. So, he's an interesting guy. This is an interesting book. I don't know quite how to categorise it. I'm going to reread it, definitely, because the stuff about time, death, migration, separation, space, language, I was really interested. As I say, the poetry I was less engaged with. So I gave this four stars, but when I come to reread it, that might go up. The Wave, Lochlan Bloom, who I met, and we did a podcast recording together that will come out in March, I think. This is on Dead Ink, my own publishers. This is one of their very early publications. And what a wild ride it is. There's 3 narratives existing in different realities, and it's looking at how they rub up against each other, how one reality can possibly correlate to a completely different reality, whether there's any bleeding from one to the other. And in a way it reminded me of 2 authors three possibly, but two definitely. The first is Christopher Priest, who does that thing of bringing different realities together. Now with Priest, it's much more explicit, and is it explicit's not the right word? It's clearer what the relationship between the two realities, or two or more realities that he brings together. So a book like The Affirmation, there were two realities. The one that's sort of set on a Second World War air base, British bomber air base, that was more than two realities. So I think there's very much that sort of vibe going on here. But the other is perhaps more surprising. That's Franz Kafka. So the last part of this book takes place in a sort of a massive mansion, which is sort of part brothel, part sort of, you know, formal party house, a bit like that film Eyes Wide Shut, that sort of masked party of very rich people. And the character gets sucked into that and doesn't fit in. And some people regard him as a guest, one of the rich guests. Some people regard him as one of the serving, waiters or whatever. And it very much had the Kafka feel of The Castle or The Trial, or even America, where he's sort of fairly passive and gets bounced from one situation to another because he doesn't know what's going on, and people keep putting their view of what he is or what he should be and what he should be doing on him. So he's sort of bouncing from pillar to post, different statuses, different occupations within that. And, I found that intriguing. I found that really sort of conjured up the sort of Kafka world to me, which I wasn't anticipating at all. And then the third book, which is less of a thing, is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, in the way that Vandermeer makes no conclusions about what you're reading, what you're experiencing, what the character's experiencing. It's completely open to interpretation. And again, there were sort of elements of this, because there's no real causation in this. The character sort of bumbles from sort of one thing to another, but equally he could have bumbled into some other situation or whatever. So he's very passive. And then the other two realities, one is about a scientist who sort of challenged quantum physics and wanted to merge it with a sort of holistic theory of the universe. It's called The Wave because he believed beneath the surface that everything was connected and that that everything lay on this wave. And then the third sort of reality is two agents, or two people in the publishing world. One's an agent, one's a publisher, and that's all done as a film script. It's a screenplay, which is a bit odd because it's not very visual. It's all dialogue. I'm not quite sure why the author's taken that decision to make it a film script sort of presentation, although I know he does write film scripts, so he knows what he's doing. I just couldn't quite see why that was presented as a film script, because there's not much visually going on. It's more like a stage play in a way. Maybe it is a stage play rather than a film script. But anyway, so this has got sort of quite a wild read. So I gave that 4 out of 5. 4 stars. And then onto this beast, and I'm really not sure how to break this down. So The Lost Empress, A Protest by Sergio de la Pava. Now, Sergio de la Pava is a public defender in the New York judicial system, and this is his third book. Obviously, because he's full-time employed, and then he writes a book like this. He doesn't write, doesn't bring out books very, only periodically. This is his third book. I'd only read one of the other two called A Naked Singularity, which was fantastic, which was set in the world of the public defendant and gives a brilliant overview of that. But it's not just sort of staying safe to what he knows, because basically the public defendant character in there, he represents all the lowest of the low. People have no money, lots of mentally ill sort of people who normally are just going to remain within the sort of prison system forever. And he gets the best outcomes for each of them. He doesn't necessarily get them free, get them off their charges, but he gets the best outcomes for them. But he loses a case, and it's like a boxer who loses his undefeated title belt. It's the same in A Naked Singularity, because there's a lot about the middleweight boxing division of the 80s or 90s when you had all these fantastic boxers. And this is similar in one respect. Instead of boxing, the sort of fixation here is the work of Joni Mitchell, the singer. And, so the story of this is a kick-ass woman called Nina Gill, who's has the best mind in NFL football, American football, professional football. and she runs the Dallas Cowboys, but she gets squeezed out by her brother, and the Cowboys go on and win 3 Super Bowls in a row. So she's full of resentment at that. And the NFL, the owners and the players are at loggerheads over money, and the owners stage what's called a lockout, where they basically cancel the season. You know, they're trying to force the hand of the players to drop their demands. Nina Gill has come through inheritance of her father, who has dementia, has willed her this inferior NFL, or it's not an NFL, inferior football league called the American Indoor Football League. And so she resolves that with the NFL sort of on hiatus, that she is going to make it, she's going to replace it. You know, she's going to get all the TV coverage, you know. It's very much an inferior league. But she is such a woman of resolve and ingenuity that, it's going to happen. Is it going to replace the NFL? So that is the through line. And she's a wonderful character who sort of channels Groucho Marx and Mae West. There's a lot of humour in here, and I'm going to just read you an example of it. So, Dia, who is this woman who, she's in a meeting with the lawyers to discuss her father's will, and they say, well, you've got to have legal representation, Nina. So Nina goes out, snatches a young girl who's come to deliver food to the office, and sort of makes it, they quickly, come up with this story that she's going to be her lawyer. And she's called Dia. Why'd you leave the Cowboys? I mean, your father's team must have been ugly. Answer? Nina, it's complicated. Dia, I have time. Nina, it's complicated was the answer. Dia, no, not good enough. Nina, can I just give you another promotion instead? Dia, no, my curiosity overrules even my ambition. Nina, let's just say the last couple of years my pop's not the same, and my brother's taken advantage of that to take the whole thing in a direction I hate. Also, I was the only woman in football. The sexual harassment was extreme. Dia, that's terrible. Why didn't you get a lawyer? Nina, what for? Most of it was on video. I couldn't deny I'd done it. So there's very much that sort of Groucho Marx humour of sort of reversing expectations of what you expect. That's where the humour comes from. And she and Dia as her sidekick, they're great. And in a similar way to Philip Roth's The Great American Novel, which was all about the world of sort of baseball, this is about NFL, and it does sort of beg the question, well, if you don't know NFL, are you going to appreciate it and go into it? And then even though there's a sort of glossary in the back, or an explanation in the back, there is always that element. But I like Philip Roth's book, Transcended Baseball, this transcended American football. So, but I do put that caveat. However, the book is not only about Nina Gill and Dia and this American Indoor Football League. There's a whole host of characters. There's an emergency team rescuer. There's a 911 person who mans that. There's this sort of a sort of criminal. He's very young, but he's been to Regis, which I assume is a university, and he's a genius, and he's sort of plotting his own defence on a murder charge. But he's in Rikers Island, so there's a lot about that. What other characters are there? Oh yes, so at some point that character gets himself into Bellevue, which is for the mentally challenged, because he's trying to dodge being put in prison, being found guilty and put in prison, so he sort of feigns madness. And there's a character in there who you assume is another inmate who sort of gives these lectures on time and space and sort of quantum physics, but no, he's actually there to lecture the inmates for some reason on all these, basically his argument is you're not insane, you just see the world differently as I do, because time and space and reality are all sort of illusions. What other characters are there? Oh yes, so there's the EMT person and the switchboard person are haunted by a call that they got where a car had driven into someone who was waiting at a bus stop and had sort of killed them. So there's the family of that man left behind. The EMT guy is obsessed with the 9/11 woman who took the call. They're sort of stalking her. There's another guy who lives with his aged mother who never goes out the house, and they're all interconnected. They all live in this town Paterson where, you know, their indoor football team, Paterson, New Jersey, I should say, their indoor football team is owned by Nina, and she's determined to make them the champions that season. But all of those, apart from the guy in prison, fade away, you know, and you begin to wonder, why are they here? I don't really see what they're doing. And the book builds up into, the season decider game, that the Paterson Pork, who are the sort of the indoor football league best team, they go on to play the Dallas Cowboys in a sort of just, once and for all decider as to who's the champion that year. And the guy who went to lecture in Bellevue is taking the outcome of that game. It's going to be a hugely significant event for the Earth. It's going to prove his theories. So it's all sort of building up to this grand thing, which is a bit over the top. Doesn't really work for me. But as I say, I don't really see what, and you get the murder that the criminal is up on a charge for. By page 500, you finally get to see what that's all about. And it's all about the Cambodian genocide, the Khmer Rouge. You think, well, where's this come from? Why haven't we heard about this before? Why have we waited 500 pages of this? And there's just too much where Pava is lecturing, his characters are lecturing us on time and space, on the justice system. It could be on other things such as loneliness or mental illness or whatever, but there's too many scenes in here which are just lectures, and it lets it down. It breaks up the action. I want to get back to Nina and Dear, because that's where the movement, the thrust of this book is. That's what carries you along. So it's a real mishmash, this book. I gave it 3.5 because, the Nina Dear stuff I gave 5. The Psycho stuff I might have given 4 to, but when he's sort of feigning mental illness, it's not clear that he isn't actually mentally ill, insanely depressed by the prospect of going back to Rikers Island. And yet he's such a super genius and can sort of think his way out of any situation. Why does Rikers Island bother him so much? So that didn't really make sense. I didn't like the build up to the ending. That seemed very sort of get all the characters in one place for this momentous event. Seemed very forced. So I just thought this was a mess, this book. It's really hard to tell a writer and their editor and their publisher this should have been 200 pages shorter. But for me, I would have benefited if it has. And just the last thing about it, I'm going to give an example of the dialogue. It is funny, So the son of the guy who was killed at the bus stop, he has 2 cousins approach him, sort of demanding justice. They're wannabe gangsters. The son is about 13, but he's super bright, so he's much more sort of mature than they are. "What's happening, son? You serious?" Nelson manages. "What? The hell, man? Some sensitivity, yo." "It's okay, really. I know there's a limited number of ways to start these conversations," Nelson says. "Shit, check out Egbert. Besides, man, dude was my uncle, and I had mad respect for him. Shit's not going to stand when what I'm getting at. So get at it then already. The hell, you got someplace to be?" Their tone is all conspiratorial and such, so Nelson's mentally running through the various exit strategies until alighting on just plain old, "You going, little man? We trying to talk to you." "Easy, he's a kid." "Yo, he's 15. "I'm 13. When I was 15, shit. What I'm saying is, this wasn't some fucking act of God, what I'm saying. No. Some motherfucker did this." "Okay," Nelson says. "Not sure where this is going." "No, there's nothing okay about it. It's retribution time. Recrimination and shit. I got a friend in that precinct. Well, technically he's just a filler in a lot of their lineups. $10 a pop. Fuck you talking about? Ain't you been listening? I'm talking about revisceration." "Pretty sure that's not a word," Nelson objects. "Of the highest order, yo." "No, what are you talking about specifically? Spell that shit out, man." "You need me to? What are we, a bunch of fucking Connecticut wasps here? Sitting around talking about a hot stock? Some fuck drove his fucking car into my uncle. Easy, yo. What do you suggest we do? Litigate that shit? Every day above ground for that fuck is an insult to every de Cervantes." You right. Now, technically, this shit falls on Nelson. He's a kid, man. Get a grip. That's why I said technically, bro. I'm not a savage. I'm talking old school. Old school it would be on him, even if he had to wait to grow up and shit. That's some Shaolin shit right there. Exactly. Schools don't be getting any older than that, neither. Point is, the kid's got to direct this shit right here, even if he can't physically do it himself. It's been done in his name and whatnot. My name, Nelson says. Agreed. So what do you say, kid? About what, says Nelson. About a guy killed your father and now you've got to tell us what to do about it. I don't understand, he says. It's simple. What do you wish would happen to this guy? Now here was an interesting question. So interesting it jolts Nelson into something like a state of supersensitivity. Because one of the few unambiguous and easily classifiable feelings he's been enjoying the last 3 days is seething anger. So there's a lot to admire in this book. You know, I thought that was funny spoof dialogue. But it's a very annoying read. Okay, so those are the books that I've read this week. So I've read 91 books this year, which is almost double what I read last year. Before the year ends, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to read. This is my bath time read because it's short stories by Eugenides, so you know I get to read a short story in the bath each time. I've only read 2 so far. I'm not very impressed with those 2. The second one was a sort of typical student hippie abroad, you know. I don't know if it was a satire or for real. It was just, you know, you can read 10 a penny of those. And the first one was about 2 old women who are friends, and you know they both love this book about sort of a Native American tribe who are really struggling, and they basically cast off their old people in order to survive because they have to move on. But I don't think Native American culture would ever do that. You know, I think they venerate their elders. So that didn't make any sense to me either. And the 2 women sort of end up in that sort of situation themselves as one of them develops Alzheimer's. So far, this is really bad, but I will persist because it's, you know, it fits in with the bath time reading schedule. Some books I may or may not read before the year's out. Ali Smith's Winter. Street of Thieves by Matthias Enard, which is the only one of his books I haven't read. I've read the other 3. No Bones by Anna Burns after the success of Milkman. I am going to be reading this with Neil Hutchison, who doesn't have a Booktube channel but is, you know, a subscriber to many people's Booktubes. So I'll just wait to hear from Neil when we're going to do that. Clarice Lispector, The Passion According to G.H. Now I've read 2 Lispector novels, love them both. This was recommended by, I think in the comment section of somebody else's video, I can't remember, sorry. This will be my 3rd Lispector book. And then we start the new year with Olverton, a novel by Adam Thorpe, which I'm buddy reading with Jason over at Old Blues Chapter and Verse. Not exactly sure exactly when we're starting it, but it's sometime early in the new year. So those are sort of on the menu at some point, not necessarily this year. And now to an unboxing. I have 3 packages. So this is the first. Otessa Moshfegh, Eileen. Now I've seen her, you know, I've never heard of this writer until this year. I've seen her mentioned in dispatches on Booktube and elsewhere, and she sounds really interesting to me. Her current book, because it's about sort of basically being, you know, drugged out of your eyeballs on prescription drugs for a year, didn't really appeal because I'm terribly bored of drug stories. But this one, the Christmas season offers little cheer for Eileen Dunlop. Trapped between caring for her alcoholic father and her job as a secretary at the boys' prison, she tempers her dreary days with dreams of escaping to the big city. In the meantime, her nights and weekends are filled with shoplifting and cleaning up her increasingly deranged father's messes. When the beautiful, charismatic Rebecca St. John arrives on the scene, Eileen is enchanted. But soon Eileen's affection for Rebecca will pull her into a crime that far surpasses even her own wild imagination. So I get the sense with this writer, there's a lot about sort of alienation and dreariness of existence. In this case, these minor acts of rebellion don't pull her out, but something happens that is going to pull her out. So I'm looking forward to that. this one. Middle G, William H. Gass. So I've read 2 Gass novels this year. No, I haven't. I've read one. I've read Omen Setter's Luck. I'm sort of part way through the tunnel, which I might get back to over the Christmas break. Oh no, Deckle Pages. Is that Arthur Knopf then? Who's this published by? Yes, Alfred. I said Arthur Knopf. Alfred Knopf, who seemed hell-bent on every novel of theirs being deckled edges, much to my chagrin. I'm not going to read what the back of this is. It's William Gass. I'm looking forward to it. I won't be reading that before Christmas though. And finally, 2 books. Oh yes, Insomnia by Marina Benjamin. This was talked about by Eric over at Lonesome Reader. This is non-fiction. I am an insomniac. I've written about insomnia. For me, it's the bane of my life, but also, it's part of my creative process, which I talked about in other videos. So I'm quite looking forward to this, just out of interest. It's supposed to be very good it's not a sort of practical guide to insomnia. It's more about, well, let's read the back. An intense, lyrical, witty and humane exploration of a state we too often consider only superficially. With her new memoir, Insomnia, Marina Benjamin has produced an unsettling account of an unsettling condition that treats our inability to sleep not as a disorder, but as an existential experience that can clarify our understanding of ourselves and of creativity and love. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And Edouard Louis, A History of Violence. Now, who did I see talking about this? Yeah, I think it was Sean the Book Maniac. History of Violence retraces the story of that night. It looks at immigration, dispossession, racism, desire and the effects of trauma in an attempt to understand and to outline a history of violence, its origins, its reasons and its causes. Yeah, right up my street. So, that's it. So what are we? The first week of December has just come to an end. My next read is the unauthorised biography of Ezra Mass by Daniel James, a book that I followed the progress of during its execution because we're published by the same people, and I'd read the first 10,000 words that Daniel had sent to me. I'm really looking forward to see how it turns out. That is the next read. I imagine that will take me at least a week. So that gets to the second week of December. Then I need to read the next in Samuel Beckett's trilogy because I want to do each one of those a year, and I haven't done. One I did last year was Malloy. I need to read Malone Dies this year, and then I'll do the Unnameable or the Unspeakable, whatever it's called, next year and finish the trilogy, and then I can read what. So I want to read Beckett after Dan's book. I would quite like to read Winter, since it is winter, and before the next one in the quartet comes out. So I imagine Daniel James's book, Samuel Beckett and this would probably get me to sort of Christmas. And then obviously I would need to do my books of the year, which I have pretty much in mind what those top 10 are going to be. I don't think I'm going to quite make the 100 book total, but there you go. So yeah, there you have it. There's my reading week wrapped up. A bit of a unboxing and a haul, and future plans for the next 3 weeks or so. Okay, thanks very much.